A resilient back is your key to getting stronger. It'll help you train harder, train more, and enjoy your life more. If you always feel your back limiting you when you're doing squats or hurt it during deadlifts, or if you're afraid to pick your kids up because it'll hurt your back, then building a resilient back should be one of your top priorities. There's plenty of bad messaging out there that you shouldn't feel your back during squats and deadlifts, which is kind of ridiculous, and that you should avoid using it at all times. This messaging is out of touch and it creates fear around these movements and ultimately results in you getting weaker and more fragile. It's likely impossible to not flex your spine when you bend over at your hips, and that's especially true when you're picking up something big or something awkward, or if you have to take your kid out of their car seat because they've fallen asleep or pretended to fall asleep because they want to be carried inside. 10 out of 10 times you want to be that loving parent that carries your kid inside, and they deserve a loving parent that can do that. Now, this messaging to not use your back or not feel your back is usually followed up with this hyperfixation on technique and building up some more ankle mobility and hip mobility as well as core stability. And this further reinforces the idea that you shouldn't use your back and you should be always avoiding it and you shouldn't feel it there. It's just a workaround that gets you to use your back less and work on other things while your back still is getting weaker and weaker. So what happens then? Well, eventually you're going to be forced to use your back again, likely in a more extreme range of motion. And because it's weaker, you're going to be working over your capacity, so your chances of getting injured are going to be higher. And the tricky part is how this injury is viewed can make you more fearful and avoidant of certain activities. Because based on the other previous messaging, you may wrongfully conclude that your back got hurt because this movement was bad or that your back is weak and it shouldn't be used. This creates this positive feedback loop into itself, making you think that, oh, certain movements should always be avoided and my body can't adapt to those, which ultimately makes you more afraid of movement, limits your life more, limits your training more, and ultimately makes you weaker. And I understand it. This messaging is so common among physios, chiros, doctors, and everyone in the health and fitness industries. And it's so easy to fall into this trap because professionals are telling you that you're moving wrong and that you're going to hurt yourself. But you need to buy their books or courses so that you can learn how to move right, because apparently it's some cryptic and esoteric knowledge that only they can understand and teach you. And it's a great mystery as to how humans have survived as a species for so long, and not only survived, but also thrived. Sadly, I had a point in my life where I bought into this messaging too, because usually the people talking about this are great at marketing and are very convincing speakers, but that doesn't mean that they're right. So this messaging breeds fragility, but what does that look like? Well, you start to believe that for some reason your back can't adapt and that some movements are just a surefire way to get injured, so you don't do them. You start to hyperfixate on things like technique and you can't progress your lifts until they look absolutely perfect. So you actually end up regressing them until you can make them look perfect, and you just try to move like a robot and your lifts get weaker and weaker over time. And this difficulty to make them look perfect and the weakness that comes along with regressing your lifts just makes you more afraid of doing certain movements, and eventually you start omitting certain things from your training. And you might also start getting more anxiety with certain movements because maybe you start getting injured more with things like when you're taking out the trash or helping your kid get in and out of the car, or now you're just afraid to play with your family because your back is going to give out on you. And with this mindset, every feeling and sensation that you get in your back is deemed as negative, and for some reason you think that you shouldn't be working your back even though there's a bunch of muscles there. So even when you're doing things where you bend forward and your back muscles have to work to keep you upright, you think for some reason that you should not be feeling them working or that you shouldn't feel your back. I always like to say, imagine thinking like this about your bicep. Being afraid of using your biceps when that sucker is just fully engorged and pumped to the max because you just did a hard set of curls and you actually used your bicep, and thinking that the tightness there that you're feeling from that pump is bad. Well, it's the same in your back. You have a ton of muscles in your back, and when you use them, you probably get a pump there. So that tightness from them is just them working, getting filled with blood because they're working just like any other muscle, and then having an awesome pump there. That pump shouldn't be viewed as bad. It should actually be viewed as a good indicator that you're working that area and that you want to do that more. I always say the best pump is a good, thick erector pump. And this fragile mindset is so detrimental because it instills this habit to never actually focus on the thing that is actually the issue, but instead just work around it. So you find these small band-aid solutions that circumvent the main problem, and it makes you think that you're making progress because it gives you these little goals to work on, and it feels good and it feels like you're moving forward, but all you're doing is just distracting yourself. You aren't making any meaningful progress on your main goal, and you're probably actually regressing because you're just not focusing on that true rate limiting step that'll push that main goal forward, which is getting your back stronger. Like I said, it's all just a distraction. And if you do get injured during a movement, it shouldn't be evidence that that movement is bad and that your body can't adapt to it because for some reason the back is some anomaly or you're some anomaly that can't adapt. Unlike the rest of the human species. Instead, it should be an indicator that you weren't prepared for that movement as you thought you were, and that you can actually break that movement down and build it up and work on all of the components of it and that movement itself that you can become more prepared for it. I just made a good video on this titled Do What Hurt You or Train What Hurt You. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but I think it's a really good watch and you should go and watch it after this video. It also really ties in nicely with my WMBP framework, so you can cue that one up after too. And boom, now you have 2 more videos after this one to watch, so I hope you have a big meal coming up. Okay, so now that you understand what that fragility looks like, it's time to flip it and build up some resiliency. And the first key thing is that mindset. Without understanding that you can become resilient, you'll never actually truly be able to build resiliency. So your mindset is what starts your journey, it's your foundation, it's your base, it's everything that you can build on after that. So let's build it right now. Your back is made to move in all directions. It's made to bend, flex, extend, twist, and it has many thick layers of muscle all around it that allow and create this movement. So thinking that you shouldn't move your back and that's meant to stay in neutral all the time is just disrespectful to how you are built. It's completely asinine to think that the human body is so flawed with its design that we have this bendy column that's actually supposed to remain in neutral and not move all the time. So not moving it is what builds up that stiffness, weakness, and gets you more likely to be injured. And I think a really great example of why your back is actually made to move and you shouldn't just try to be keeping it in neutral all the time is all the studies looking at how the spine flexes every time you bend forward at the hips. Even if you're doing something as easy as a body weight hinge, your spine is going to flex past half of its available flexion, so it's going to move through the majority of its range of motion. Just bending forward and not doing anything else, your spine is moving. And that shows that this is your body coordinating that movement. That movement is supposed to happen, and you can train it and build it up. It's not bad. And I know that the main argument about not moving your back is around the discs, but your discs are built to withstand a lot of force, like insane amounts of force. So the studies that really kind of moved this fear-mongering around moving your back forward were built on dead pig spine studies. They just took out one spinal segment, so that means vertebrae, disc, vertebrae, removed the muscles around it, loaded that sucker up, bent it back and forth beyond its normal range of motion, or at least to its very end range of motion in each direction, continuously, and then found a breaking point. And that breaking point didn't happen right away with a few flexes or bends. It took hours and thousands of bends in a row without rest and time to adapt, because they're dead pig spines, for that breaking point to happen. So these studies weren't set up to find, is this bad or good? They were set up to find a failure point so they could use that and then demonize movement. And with that, they wrongfully extrapolated these results to living human conditions and concluded that flexion, especially under load, is bad for the human back. Because apparently we're dead pig spines with no muscles around us, and we flex back and forth beyond our normal range of motion for hours at a time. Yeah, I'm just going to go into the gym, load up some weight, change gravity somehow so that it's always pushing down on my spine, bend over until I kiss my own butthole, and then bend back until I hit the back of my Johnson with the back of my head, and then keep doing that over and over for an hour. And that'll hurt my discs eventually. That's kind of what was going on with these studies and what they actually show. It's completely ridiculous to have this insane mindset that applies to living human conditions. It actually infuriates me. Okay, getting back on track with it. So this flawed base now has other studies that look at forces on the spine in different positions, especially flex spines, and then they can make conclusions based on that flawed base. So these other studies get people to bend over, they look at the pressure in the discs in certain positions, and they find that certain positions have more pressure on the discs. Funnily enough, some of the positions actually have less pressure on some of the lower discs, but they just ignore that because it doesn't suit their bias, and then they can't conclude that flexion is bad for everything. But coming back to it, so they find that there's more pressure in these flex positions. So they say, hey, this is bad and will lead to injury because of that flawed base. Flexion's bad and will lead to your disc blowing up. But because that base is flawed, it completely invalidates that conclusion that the flexion is bad, because that base can't be extrapolated to humans and living conditions. And it doesn't show that just because a force or just because a position puts force on a disc, that disc is going to give out and that position is bad. So it just completely invalidates that conclusion, yet it's so commonly held with this bias that it's bad that it's just accepted by the community. And aside from that technical, well, actually, this invalidates your opinion, the other problem with it is that forces aren't bad, and forces are actually exactly how the body adapts. That's exactly how resistance training works. You put forces through your muscles so that they can adapt to those forces over time and get bigger and stronger. This is how your bones and your cartilage in your joints actually get stronger from running, because you put force through them over time and then they build up. And actually, with running, there are studies showing that, in a dose dependent relationship with speed and distance as well, your discs actually become bigger with, well, sorry, it's a correlation. So I can't say they actually become bigger because correlation doesn't imply causation, but discs in runners that run more and faster actually seem to be bigger than people who don't run or run slower and less distance. So it is one thing showing that loading the disc may actually be beneficial, and these discs may actually be adapting to that load. And there's other studies done in petri dishes showing that collagen tissues in disc tissue actually show anabolic factors to loading, and that is more evidence that the discs can actually adapt. And some other examples that I like to give out that are maybe a little less strong. This anecdotal one is you see people deadlifting 700 plus pounds and you just think that their discs were made to be able to handle that right from the get-go. No, they built up to that over time. You look at them and you think, oh, my back will blow up if I try that. Yeah, no duh, because you never tried to deadlift up to 700 pounds. Your max is 315 and you can barely pull that. That's why you can't deadlift 700 pounds, because you haven't built up the capacity to do that. So if you build it up over time, eventually your back will adapt and be able to handle that. That's why I can do Zercher deadlifts with over 400 pounds now. That's why I can deadlift over 600 pounds, because I didn't just walk in and try that day one and absolutely blow my back up. I built up to it over time because I worked within my capacity and let my body adapt. And another example that I like to point out is that you see spontaneous reabsorption of lumbar disc herniations. So that jelly gets sucked back into the disc and the disc heals up, showing that, hey, your discs are capable of adapting and healing. And if you think that your discs aren't capable of that, then you clearly have not actually looked at the evidence. You clearly have not used any critical thinking or thought for a second, probably. And you're just repeating this fear-mongering misinformation that the greatest fear-mongers and misinformationers, what a great word, usually spout. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm sure we can all think of a few examples. So hopefully all of these examples can make you think, hey, if I just load my discs properly over time and my back properly over time, maybe they can adapt to it and you can build bigger and stronger discs. It's really tough to say discs, and it's also really funny using discs and bigger and stronger all the time. And there's just a good 13-year-old boy joke going on in my head, but I'm just going to keep that in there right now. And now you can think about it too. Okay, I was ranting pretty hard there, and I hope it all flows together, but the underlying point of this resilience mindset here, and kind of what I was getting at, is that you have to believe that your body is adaptable. You have to understand that your body is adaptable, and that will help you build up over time. You just have to find something that you're capable of doing, load it within your capacity for a long enough time, and progressively load it as your capacity goes up, and you will be able to build that resilience and handle more. So to bring it back to how I started this video, if you do that for long enough, then eventually your back is not going to be the limiting factor in your training. You won't feel it as much during squats, or you won't be afraid of that feeling as much during squats and deadlifts, because your back is strong and resilient and you understand that. You won't have this fear that when you pick up your kid, you're going to blow your back out. You'll be able to play with them, take them in and out of the car as much as you want, because you'll have the capacity to do so, because you built it up over time. And it all comes down to that mindset. So you have to change your mindset if you want to start building up that resilience. That is what fuels the fire. And working on these things that can help you build up the resilience will also help to reinforce that resilient mindset and build up that resilient mindset even more. This is why I love the odd lifts, and I'm going to make a video on that as well. But this is why I love the odd lifts, because they get you to do things that you think you never could have done before, and you find a way to do them and you build them up over time, and soon you're lifting weights that blow your own mind and you think, wow, I am resilient. I can do anything. I can overcome anything. And it's just really empowering. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope that this inspired you to build that resilient mindset and then build that resilient back. Now go out there and make some gains.